Hello, guys. Welcome back to the Quad Method. I hope everyone has had a wonderful holiday season and New Year's, and we're going to pick up as if I had not posted a video in the last 11 months. So lately, I've been asking myself, what are the hardest things to teach on Zoom? Because that's what everyone's basically doing now. And from personal experience, one of the things I have a hard time teaching is ear training. Ear training is basically practicing your listening skills. And it's extremely important because it allows you to accurately describe what you're listening to. It allows you to identify mistakes to fix or to not do. And it also allows you to identify perfections which you want to strive for. As a performer, it allows you to become self-sufficient, where now you don't have to rely on your section leader or your teacher to point out your flaws. You can actually do that yourself. You can listen to what you're playing and the sound that you're producing and identify the problems that you want to fix. It allows you to improve yourself exponentially because now, after rehearsal, when you go home, you're not just mindlessly repping the same thing. You're actually listening to yourself and actively fixing problems that you have. If you don't actively try to improve what you're playing, then you're practicing a lot of mistakes. You want to make sure that you can identify mistakes while you're practicing at home or practicing at rehearsal and fix those mistakes as you do more and more reps. As a teacher, it also allows you to do two things. One, it allows you to teach your students how to listen to the things that you're hearing so that, again, you can help them become autonomous, which in turn allows you to trust that when they go home, they're actually going to show up to rehearsal better. And two, it allows you to give applicable comments where your students are now working to fix their faults, their actual faults. Arbitrary comments usually lead to a lot of wasted time because you're basically leading your students to try to fix a problem that they may or may not have. I like to describe what I'm listening to in three different categories. The first one is rhythm, which most people usually associate with listening. You usually hear words with like being early, being late, being open, being closed, being fast, being slow. And then we have dynamics, in which case that has to do with how loud you are. And usually we hear words like overbalance, underbalance, too loud, too soft. And then the last category is just overall quality of sound. Quality of sound has to do with just the resonance and the tone of what you're playing. You know, how heavy you are, how light you are, your touch. Okay, with that being said, how do we actually train our ears? Well, the most effective way, in my opinion, is getting feedback from teachers, getting feedback from people that actually have the listening skills that you want to have. But even if you have teachers that are very good at listening, you have to actually take the information correctly to get better at it. So what I mean by that is after you do one rep or a few reps, you have to memorize what those reps sounded like so that when your teacher gives you a comment like, this part was too slow, this part you rushed, you came in early on this attack, you can go back to that recording in your head and say, okay, I'm going to associate what I just played here with being too early or whatever comment it was. So that when you make that same mistake somewhere else or in that same spot, you know exactly what's wrong with it. And the more you're able to label mistakes, the more you're going to pick up on those listening skills. You have to hear the same mistake a few times before you actually understand what it means. Like understanding what it means to be on the backside of tempo, being on the front side of tempo, or coming in early, coming in late, and how it all relates to the metronome and with your feet. But it's definitely a good starting place to have somebody there to tell you, or somebody there to give you comments because they actually hear the mistakes that maybe you don't. And I think it's also important to identify what perfection is too. Being able to listen to something and know that it's perfect gives you something to strive for. Think about something that you're playing right now, whether it's in your show music or exercise, and you've never really considered what it's supposed to sound like. Now ask yourself, what am I trying to get better at if I don't know what it's supposed to sound like? Another way to get better at ear training is just by doing some experiments by yourself. Being wrong on purpose is also a good tool to help you narrow down what it is supposed to sound like. Start with what you know is wrong and then slowly make your way over to what you think is right. And that way you cover a spectrum and you can start to listen and identify, all right, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. I think this is right. And then go to rehearsal and get some feedback so that you can calibrate what you think is right. And the last, I guess, advice I would have for ear training is listen to groups that you think are perfect. Listen to them and try to listen to how close to perfect that they are, and then try to imitate that sound. If you think one group's roles sound perfect, try to imitate those rolls. Play with the video if you can. And then you can compare what sound you're producing to what they're producing. And then you can figure out the discrepancies and how to fix your rolls to sound more like them. But since this is an intro video, I'm going to give a couple examples here. I'm going to do one rep that's as close to perfect as I can play it, and I'll do another rep that's wrong. And I want you to listen to the two and try to figure out why the one that's wrong is wrong. We're going to start with something simple. We're going to play 8 on a hand, and then in future parts of this topic, we'll start getting into some things that are a little bit more complicated. So there are a few things to note when listening to this rep. First, identify that because we're playing eighth notes, every other note lines up exactly with the metronome. If we're playing exactly with the metronome, we are covering up the met. Covering up the met is a very useful way to identify when you're playing in time. When you're playing something that has a lot of downbeats, sometimes your sound covers up the sound of the metronome to the point where you cannot hear the metronome. So when you're playing something like eights, I would suggest turning down your metronome a little bit and see if you can cover it up to the point where you cannot hear the met anymore. Also listen to the hand transitions. Every time we switch from right hand to left hand and left hand to right hand, there is no shift in the rhythm. It is consistent going back and forth. Hand transitions are usually a pretty common spot to find rhythmic inconsistencies. And lastly, listen to the dynamics. Every single note is the same dynamic. There are no accents and there are no diminuendos or crescendos. All right, now I'm going to play a rep that's not so perfect. And before you go on with the video, I want you to see if you can figure out 1 to 3 reasons why that rep is not as good. All right, if you haven't already, pause the video, think about it, or listen to it again before we go on. I made 3 purposeful mistakes. Maybe there are more in there, but that's for you to decide. First of all, rhythmically, it's pretty behind the metronome. If you listen carefully, you can hear the metronome downbeats first, and then you could hear my downbeats coming right after the metronome. Also, rhythmically, listen to the hand transitions. You can hear the slight rhythmic inconsistency when you switch hand to hand. In this case, I'm imitating, realizing that I'm slow, and then rushing the next attack to get back on with the met. And lastly, listen to how I put an accent on each hand transition. If we assume 8 on a hand is universal where everything should be one dynamic, then this is a mistake. It is not musically correct. All right, so now that we have a pretty good rep and we have a very not good rep, listen to how it sounds together. All right, now take that and extrapolate it to a 9-person snare line or maybe a 15-person battery. If everybody had a slightly different interpretation of tempo, or rhythms rather, it would not sound good. Which is why it's so important that we all are able to listen for the same things and be able to fix ourselves so that we can assimilate more and more and more until we produce a sound that's uniform and consistent with each other. All right. For part 1, I'm going to end it right there. Hopefully that kind of gave you some insight on what your training is. I'll try to add on to the other parts to give you a better example what to listen for. I might need to borrow a better mic and get on some real drums because it's hard to imitate certain sound qualities on a pad. Have a great beginning to 2021, and I'll see you next time.